Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. We're about to get started as people file in. My name is Suda David Willip, and on behalf of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, I'm really happy to welcome you to this discussion on the German election, which is less than 2 weeks away. We're going to spend the next 40 or 45 minutes talking about issues, who's up, who's down, during this short campaign season because of the snap election after the breakup of the Traffic Light Coalition last fall. I encourage all of you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to pose questions. We'll get to them shortly, maybe in about 25 minutes or so. But before we do that, I need to introduce our wonderful speakers. I'm very happy to welcome Melanie Amann, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Der Spiegel. Melanie previously led Spiegel's Berlin bureau and served on the editorial board. She's a frequent commentator on German party politics. I just saw her on Karen Mioska on Sunday evening after the Schultz-Merz debate. And it's also great to have Laura Christine Krause with us. She is the founding executive director of More in Common Germany, which is an organization that provides analysis on societal cohesion and data on polarization. Previously, she headed the Future of Democracy program at the Berlin-based think tank Das Progressivzentrum, and she just finished up her year as a 2024 Yale World Fellow. Thanks to both of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. So, Melanie, why don't we start with you first? I would like to talk a little bit, actually going back. The Traffic Light Coalition that fell apart in November, actually the day after the US election on November 6th, was also marked by the so-called Zeitenwende, or the turning point speech that Chancellor Scholz gave on the floor of the Bundestag shortly after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So, Germany basically having to adapt to a whole host of geopolitical challenges. Do you think the upcoming election reflects what's at stake? Do you think voters are understanding that the next government will have to tackle really hard decisions like defense spending, social spending, and investment? What are your thoughts?
Well, hello to everybody first. I'm really happy to be here, and I really enjoy talking especially to Suda, who I've known for quite some time now, and who's doing a terrific job for the German Marshall Fund in Berlin. And yeah, I think absolutely German voters are very keenly aware of the geopolitical challenges for this new government, although I also think that these events are like the backdrop for the election, but I think most Germans do not base their decision on any policy suggestions regarding these global challenges. I still think that the domestic issues are the most pressing ones, yet the anxiety caused by the war in Ukraine and its outcome or the consequences for Germany, or the US elections and the consequences for us, the Chinese challenge Russia as a challenge, as a hostile state. They cause a lot of anxiety and fear. But I think many people, or a lot more people than maybe the politicians do think, will still vote according to their personal life situation, to their social situation, maybe economic situation, regarding if they're a business owner, or if their business is threatened by the consequences of the green transformation, if they worry about their personal wealth in the near future, or of course, the topic which has developed into the key or central one, migration. How will the next government deal with the challenge of illegal migration and integration of migrants into our society?
So, Laura, Melanie just teed us up on the issues that voters are thinking about. I mean, would you agree? The debate on Sunday, I think a half an hour of a 90-minute debate was spent on migration. So, what are the issues, and how are they maybe interwoven to sort of the geopolitical challenges that Germany is facing? Maybe you can talk about that, and also a little bit about the mood in the electorate. I mean, is there a sense of polarization here when you compare other Western democracies and what just went on in the election in the United States as well last fall?
Yes, thank you for having me. First of all, I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. And I can completely agree on what Melanie said, and I can build on that. In the polling that we do on German society and German sentiments, we do quantitative polling, and we just ran focus groups last week, actually. So I have a fresh impression of where Germans are at. No international topic makes it into the top 10 of Germans' preferences. I would completely agree on the anxiety that people feel, but we're quite focused, I think, on ourselves. And overall, I would say, asking about the mood of Germans, I would say we're in a funk right now. We've been in a funk for a little bit, and we will not get out of this funk before election day. So what we see in our research mostly is not per se polarization, but what's most at the forefront, I would say, is fatigue. This is really a society that is in a bad mood and doesn't really expect the society to be better. So for example, 67% of the people we polled both expect societal situation and the economy to decline in the next couple of years, which is an interesting disconnect to when we ask them about their personal situation. They're not that negative about their personal situation, but when they look at the overall direction of the country, they're quite negative. And I think what matters so much in this conversation is that this lack of future, this negative outlook that Germans currently have of the future, is paired with a pretty deep political disenchantment. So sort of how much Germans believe in politics' ability to shape the big problems this country is facing, like many others, because of the geopolitical changes, is quite low. So only 19% of our respondents believe that politics has that ability and sort of the zest to take on those problems. Only 32% of Germans say they will feel represented, and 71% say they feel left alone by politics. And so this sentiment, sort of this notion that everybody knows there are big changes going on and that the country is facing challenges, paired with a declining trust in the political system to really tackle this, is something where then actors who sort of feed off of polarization and those sentiments are really able to step in politically, and we see them profiting, both in recent elections last year, but also in the polls.
Now that was definitely interesting to hear. In fact, anecdotally, I was at the hairdresser last week, and she was saying that, oh, nothing's going to change even after the vote. And I guess there is that sense that even if they're voting, there's not like a necessarily anticipation for that things are going to get better, even though, as I mentioned, Germany is facing a whole host of changes that need to be implemented. So you mentioned the populist forces. Let's talk about that. And I know, Melanie, you've really spent a lot of time studying the AfD, and the far right AfD is a strong second right now behind the conservatives. So would you characterize its support as because of anti-incumbency sentiment, which is also something we've seen across Europe and also in the United States? Or is it also after many years of the CDU leaving a vacuum on the right side of the political spectrum? And can we now consider the AfD as sort of mainstream in Germany right now? They're polling well, like at 20% solidly. And Laura, please come in on this too. So, but Melanie, floor is yours first.
Well, maybe not a mainstream party, but when they were founded, they used this slur or negative term for the established parties, calling them Altparteien. So I think that the AfD by now has kind of turned into an Altpartei as well, like this oldish and established and as the populists would say, saturated and corrupt as well. So I think they have basically the traits that they accuse other parties of. I think they do. It's the reasons for their success. I think it's the mixture of the 2 points that you made. They do feed off the anger about especially the Green Party and the former government, and painting the situation, like Laura pointed out very well, painting the situation way more grave than it actually is and stirring fear. But it's also, I mean, there are actual problems that Germany has and actual policy reasons that people turn to them, even though, in my opinion, they don't have the policy answers to them. But the problems are there, like a lack of modernization, digitalization, a lack of like the economic weakness of our country, and the difficulties of the green transition, which are obviously there, and the international challenges, and so on and so forth. And of course, there's always the bit of cultural war that you have to throw in, which they're also riding on, like the topic of like, should you use like about transgender people, or should you use general language, which you guys can be happy you don't have that problem in English, in the English language, that you're not as confronted with the question of which gender you're talking about and how you address people as male or female. So I think that's the mixture of these 2 topics, and so and I feel that they will probably, in the long run, they might establish themselves at a lower level if the next government manages to at least address a few points that they make, and not cause this image of instability and weakness that the former government had. So if the new government manages to just be more or less stable, then I think a lot of things will calm down.
So Laura, before I do that, I'm gonna pose a second question to Melanie, but I want you to also answer both because, many people may have seen the news last week in Germany that Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz put forth a motion in the Bundestag for tighter restrictions on migration. And the motion was passed with the help of the AfD. It didn't become law, but some people are saying that a taboo was sort of broken in post-war German history. Do you think that's the case, Melanie? Do you consider that there, sort of a Rubicon has been crossed in German political culture? Certainly SPD feels that way, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. And then Laura, please weigh in on both.
I do agree, but not only because of the vote. Actually, votes like these have happened before. I mean, the CDU was quick to point out that the SPD has also been voting jointly with the AfD on certain topics. But the point was that here, Friedrich Merz went into the Bundestag knowing for sure that he would get no majority. There was no chance in hell that he would get a majority without the AfD. So in that case, he knew he was kind of banking on it. And the SPD voted with the AfD knowing that they had a government majority, or like they did not push things through with the help of the right wingers. And I think this was a taboo. And I think that actually the CDU themselves were feeling a bit queasy about what they were doing. And
I think that's a good description. I think they seemed there was a hush in the Bundestag after the motion went through.
yeah, they were sitting there, like, and Merz even said he regretted the outcome, which of course was a terrible signal as well to the public and to the AfD, and AfD mocked it in their speech afterwards. So, but I still think that it will not hurt Merz like noticeably in the polls, I believe, or from the polling we've seen on the potential election result. I don't think it's going to hurt him really badly, because SPD was mainly focusing on this very point without really presenting their own policy alternatives to what he had presented. And like the outrage and the description of like the anger they were voicing in parliament was like stood in contrast to their lack of activity, so to say, or like really engaging with the voters who want a change in migration policy. So they didn't really have answers to them, or they didn't show enough resolve, I think, in their eyes. So that was maybe a strategic mistake to mainly focus on like the anger or the the protest against this and not really offer something on their own.
So Laura, maybe you can talk a little bit about the AfD as well, in the sense that, I mean, is this a party that has now a place in the German political party landscape? You know, some people also talk about the party as being, you know, having its stronghold in the East, but again, it's polling at 20% before this election. And also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what happened last week, what transpired in the Bundestag.
Yes, happy to. So I think what's unique about our party system in Germany is that it shows more what's going on in a country than if you, for example, if you have a two-party system, you know? And then, so I think in a way, the AfD's success and also its place in the German parliament now for 8 years, if I'm counting correct, shows that, you know, there is a potential for this party in our party spectrum. And our party spectrum is getting more diverse, so to say, you know, because we also have emerging parties on the left. And we've seen in our polling for the last 5 years that the AfD support has always been a mix of people who are firmly with the AfD for sort of say ideological reasons, policy reasons, like you said, Melanie, or people who are there because they give them their vote because they know it's going to send a signal, and they want to voice their agreement. And it is both. And I think it's really important to keep this in mind in any conversation about this. And when we ask our focus groups about the AfD, it's sort of interesting that even last year we heard people saying that they said they would vote for them, but they would not want them to be in power, you know, so they sort of want to have this opportunity to give a signal without it really having an effect in terms of the majorities in government, which is a really fascinating instance. And that's why I love that we put psychology at the center of our research. And also, we asked this in a study that we published in November, and 64% of respondents said they don't want the AfD in the government, you know? So I think the party in its life is still sort of in this stage that people kind of expect it to not be in government, but still want to send a signal through it.
If
That
I may
said,
add just one point, I
yeah,
think it's an excellent point you're making. And I want to add that my impression is that they don't only want to send a signal, they actually want to punish
yes,
the
it's about
the
punishing,
parties who are
exactly.
in
Yeah,
parliament. It's like a Strafwahl, a
yeah,
Strafwähler. You know, they really
it's a
want to
strong
hurt
feeling.
people. Yeah, they want to
Yes,
hurt the other
exactly. I
person.
completely agree. It's a strong feeling that people express when I talk about this. So I think that's a bit lost in the public conversation about this, because I think as long as you don't address that emotion, a lot of the campaigning we see right now is applying to the head, not to the heart, you know. And I think a lot of this comes from an emotional place. And in Germany, we tend to think of ourselves as very rational human beings, you know, so maybe we have a harder time with that. But speaking about what happened in the parliament, you know, I think there are two layers to this. So it is true that migration is the top issue in this campaign. It's very hard for parties to cut through with anything else. And it's also an issue that has been at the top sort of the issues when Germans are asked what they care about. It's that fighting crime, strengthening pensions, and worries about the German economy. But I think what happened last week was both everything what Melanie described, and also that this conversation was not really anymore about the topic. You know, it was a political show. It was a political show. Everybody knew that this motion would not really result in any legislative changes, for complicated reasons. And I think what was really lost, so we could talk about the taboo and sort of the breaking of the firewall, as we call it, but I think what became very apparent for anybody watching is that a new coalition government is going to have to do a lot of healing before they can get together after this election. And our system is built on the compromise, you know, that's what our constitution is built on. And sort of the art of the compromise and getting there even across party lines. Watching it felt almost impossible to see how they're going to get there. But I do agree that I think the details of a lot of what happened there and the taboo broken and why it was broken, I think the details probably got lost on most people. This was really something for people like us, you know, who follow this closely, who maybe even have to for work. And so, but I think for the wider public, two pretty different narratives prevailed, and that it's probably rather confusing for people to make sense of it.
So I see that questions are coming into the Q&A box, which is great. Keep them coming. And one of the questions is one that I actually asked about the East German
Yeah.
the stronghold in the former East Germany. Can you talk a little bit about that, Laura? And then I'm going to give you both one more question, and then I'm going to start addressing the questions in the Q&A box.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up again. So it is true that the AfD is stronger in the East than in the West, but we've actually always pointed out that this is not just an East German thing. And I think for too long it has been treated as such. We had state elections that matter quite a big deal quite a lot in Germany, even 5-6 years ago, where the AfD in West German states had 14%, and it didn't cause sort of these big conversation. What's wrong with Baden-Württemberg, But when things happen in East Germany, that's sort of usually the reaction. I mean, one way to read it is that just in general, traditional party alliances in the East are weaker because they don't go way back. They're not families that say, oh, we always voted for the Social Democrats in the past 40, 50 years because they entered a new system, a new democracy much later. But there are also sentiments they tap into. And I would say in our research, we usually see that people in the East of Germany have stronger sentiments, but they usually don't go against what people in the West think. So, for example, people are disenchanted with German politics. They're more disenchanted in the East. The only issue area really where we see a difference is when we poll about Russia and Ukraine. That's really where East Germans hold very different sentiments and go the other direction than West German. And the AfD is tapping into that, and Bündnis Wagenknecht is as well.
Right. It's fascinating information. But I'm actually going to circle back to one of the points you actually just made about the AfD and bring that up with Melanie, because, so it has, the party is getting votes, but just like the voters are saying, I'm voting for them, but I don't necessarily want them to be in government. And all the mainstream parties have also refused, at least on the federal level, to say, we're never going to form a coalition with the AfD. So, are there still unknowns in the outcome? I mean, are we sort of charting the course for another grand coalition? Is that inevitable, or are there other variations that could come about? So, 2 weeks before the vote. Let's go to you, Melanie, and then Laura, and then I'm going to start opening up some of these questions in the chat.
Well, I think that a grand coalition would, in the current situation, probably be the best result that we could end up with. Interestingly, years back when I came to Berlin in 2013, when the conservative and liberal government was just infighting all the time, and then the liberals didn't make it back into the Bundestag, then we had a grand coalition, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, we have a grand coalition. That's awful." There are too many, like there's a too big a chunk of parliament in this coalition. There's no real opposition going on. Like parliament will be we'll be suffocating from like only endless speeches of people supporting the government cause, and there are only very small groups actually opposing their cause. So now, in the current situation, I think we would be in a safe and good place if after the difficult situation of the traffic light coalition, where we had 3 very different partners ideologically at odds most of the time, and which finally fell apart. I think this would be a situation of relief and stability, that if we had the CDU, CSU and the SPD working together for a while. But will this be possible? I mean, at this point, I couldn't say for sure yes or no, because there's a large chunk of undecided voters out there who we don't really know who they will opt for, who will decide on the spur of the moment. I think in like the general direction of the election is quite clear that we will most likely see a CDU winner and an SPD loser, and the SPD and the Greens will fight for 2nd or 3rd place. But I still think there can be some development, some movement. It's hard to predict if the FDP is coming in. I still think there's a possibility it might get into parliament. So it's really, I think if they don't get in, then we would have CDU and SPD, and then we would have a stable majority. But if FDP gets in, then we might see the situation that we would need a three-party coalition again. And that would be awful, I think, because there would have to be some kind of either involvement of the FDP or of the Greens. So we would have a situation like the traffic light situation where a left-wing party and the FDP would have to cooperate and make compromises. And the CDU, as like floating above it with the chancellor, would have to forge compromises. And Friedrich Merz is a very inexperienced politician when it comes to governing. I mean, he has zero government experience. He's a terrible strategist. He has, I mean, as we saw in the last weeks, like he has a tendency, he's very thin-skinned. He has a tendency to want to like go, in Germany we say like with the head through the wall, bang his head against the
That'd be
wall
the
until
English
he
equivalent as well.
falls
I'm sure.
down.
I'm thinking about it right now.
So I can, like, as a citizen, regardless of what my political convictions are, I can only hope that we will have a grand coalition, which will be, or a two-party government at least, which would be able to start some reforms that we so badly need.
So it's great. I mean, this question actually aligns with a question from Stephen Sabo. He's asking which parties will not pass the 5% hurdle. Melanie, you talked about perhaps the FDP making it in. I think they're pulling at 4% right now. Laura, what about the other parties? You mentioned the BSW. They started out really strong last year, but it seems like the party's petered out. What do you think? Is there still a chance that they can get in? And of course, the left have a very interesting campaign strategy as well. If they get 3 direct seats, then they're in as well. So talk about those two parties. I mean, the political system is very fragmented, and if they don't get in, will that also give us a little bit more clarity in the political party landscape?
Yes, I completely agree with Melanie. I think election night will be quite interesting, probably deep into the night, because the 5% hurdle is really going to make a huge difference this time, because we essentially have 3 parties, that could get stuck there, and it will come really close. And actually the left, which was sort of said to be dead after BSW broke away from it, and polled very strongly, as you said. The left party was sort of said to be dead, but now they poll just above 5% in some of the polls, and they're actually the second strongest party after the AfD on TikTok, So it's a really because they have a strategy that both tailors towards TikTok and, as you mentioned, direct mandates with 3 older gentlemen who said that they should run again to make sure that the party has
the dream team, right? What are they calling themselves? Like the
Silberlocken.
Greylock?
Silberlocken, yes, silver strands. So that's a fascinating. If that really works out, I think a lot of political scientists will have a lot of fun with analyzing that campaign strategy. But I do think that I think there was actually an opportunity really lost in the traffic light coalition to put a positive framing on this 3-party alliances, because in a way you could say this is what we in society need to do anyways. We need to get along with people who are different from us. And these 3 parties were fighting on our behalf, and because our world got more complicated, our society got more complicated, it was also more visible in a way, there have been also grand coalitions have not always been smooth, but it was a bit more behind closed doors and there were bigger majorities. So it was easier to lose a few people along the way. Sadly, as we all know, this was not at all neither how the public debate or the participants framed what was going on within the traffic light coalition. And so I would agree that there's a fatigue to these multi-party governments, even though it's funny that at the state level, we have a few of those who run quite smoothly, even similar constellations. But I do agree that the Grand Coalition would really be the only option I see right now. Sorry to the Green Party for a 2-party government, but I think it will really come down to the margins of some of the smaller parties to see if that's even possible.
So we have to go back to the AfD because there are a few questions here about Elon Musk, sort of the surprise guest in the German election season. What effect do both of you think his endorsement of the AfD will play? And another question also talks about, are the opinion polls really reflecting the true level of AfD support in German society? What do you think? Melanie, go ahead.
Well, interestingly, I think when I first heard about Elon Musk being willing to spend like an hour-long chat with Alice Weidel on his platform, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to give Weidel so much visibility and relevance that she's going to be through the roof. I expected her to surpass even the CDU. And I was wrong. And I think that maybe, bottom line is, he may have heard her more than he helped her. Also with his appearance at the convention, at the AfD convention. And not only because Musk does not have a good reputation in general, like among moderate voters as well, like not among AfD voters, but many people view him as a bad influence on democracy globally speaking, and on Donald Trump, and are worried what, like if and feel that he's interfering too much in German politics. But also within the AfD, there are people who are quite strongly anti-American and also anti-capitalist, interestingly. They don't see Musk as like the genius entrepreneur who, like, if you recognize as Weidel, then she must be like an economic genius as well. But in fact, that by like showing support for her, it's like, oh, is she like this transatlantic globalist person? Is she trying
She worked
to,
for Goldman Sachs actually before. I
yeah,
mean, she also comes from the
fits the
finance world, if
picture.
I'm not mistaken.
So that may have backfired a little.
Hmm. And do you think the support, is it capped at 20%? Because I mean, that seems to be kind of the ceiling, even in previous elections. Or do you think that there's more room? And I'm going to tack on another question. Why
I
not? And
think
then
there's
go to you,
more
Laura.
room,
Because
and
if there is a grand coalition, do you ever see that firewall breaking? Do you ever see a situation, even maybe in 4 years, where the CDU says, okay, we're going to form a coalition with the AfD?
well, first of all, I don't think that 20% are the ceiling, not at all. And I think I saw a question there about like, will the AfD be able to enlarge that voter base to West Germany? Yes, I do think so. And I mean, they have entered voter territory, like well-educated Western Germans are not afraid to vote for them anymore, or to show they're voting for them and express their support for them. And I think the more pressing the issues get, the domestic issues get, like security issues, migrant issues, the more, and should the economy tank further, then there might be, there might be more support for them. But will there be a coalition? I mean, not right now. And I believe Friedrich Merz, when he stresses that he will definitely, or when he promises, pledges never to enter a coalition with the AfD, I think he really means it. But as I said before, he's a poor strategist, and he's also a poor negotiator, is my impression. So he, like an inexperienced politician like him, and I'm sorry he is, after 20 years out of politics and never in a situation where he was in government, there might be the situation where he doesn't get his asylum policy and his migrant policy through. So what if he doesn't find a compromise with SPD? Will he say, okay, just this once, I'm at my wit's end, I'm putting my law to vote because I think it's the right thing, and whoever thinks the same may vote for it, and I don't care if it's AfD or not, like he did the last time.
Mm.
So I think there's a possibility he might like cooperate at one point, or accept their support at one point, which is strictly speaking not a cooperation. But I think he's still firmly opposed to forming a coalition, and I think he would not even start negotiating with them. But I mean, who knows how long he will be here? If he has a devastating election result, he will be weakened. If there is a three-party government which collapses at one point, there might be other people taking over who have fewer qualms about working with AfD. And then we might
Right,
see
like, and
a
people mentioned the Austria model,
yeah.
right, where
Oh,
they
I'm
are
going to
right
stop
now.
here and give Laura a chance.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
Laura, quickly on Elon Musk, and also, do you ever see the CDU maybe saying, okay, we have to join forces with the AfD? Again, not now, but in 4 years' time, or the next cycle after that.
Yes, so maybe quickly on Musk, I haven't seen any polling of what AfD voters say about him or AfD supporters. So I'm also sort of in the land of hypothesis here. I actually think who was most sour about his support for the AfD was the FDP. because it was quite obvious that they tried to go on a similar strategy that sort of this technology, Silicon Valley, cryptocurrency, sort of appealing to younger, less ideological people. That actually they have been quite good at that in recent elections, and that would have been part of their campaign. But then Musk did not go with them, and actually, when Musk tweeted in favor of the AfD for the first time, Christian Lindner, the FDP party, had like tweeted back at him and said, "No, you got the party wrong. You
Talk to me.
Yes, exactly. Talk to me." So I think they were sort of blindsided by that the most. And I think what's interesting right now in the conversation, in the other parties, is that what I take is that basically Social Democrats and conservatives blame each other for the success of the AfD, which is quite an interesting conversation to watch from the outside. And so I would agree that right now the conservatives are still in a place where they wouldn't want to work with the AfD. But I actually think the German conservatives are one of the most interesting parties to watch in the next couple of years, because they actually have been an example, unlike other countries, neighboring countries. We have a successful conservative party that is not a right-wing party. But I think this election and what happens after is going to be quite crucial for whether that continues or whether it's not. And I think this element of unpredictability that Merz showed in this, and sort of what you described, Melanie, sort of these fast reactions to something happening and then sort of head through the
Very
wall.
impulsive.
Yeah. I think that's what could really harm him, because Germans don't like surprises, and I think this could be the one thing that maybe a few of those undecided voters that we already talked about might in the end choose Scholz, even though people are very unhappy with him, over Merz, because he feels more predictable to Germans.
Yeah, I mean, Scholz actually performed quite well in the debate on Sunday. I thought he was going to be more on the defensive, but it looks like they came out sort of even, right, on Sunday, Scholz and Merz, when it comes
Yes,
to the
and
poll.
among women, he was actually ahead by quite a bit.
And so let's stay on that note, switch it to foreign policy, because as I mentioned, Germany's facing a very different geopolitical backdrop. So do you think, Laura and Melanie, that the Trump effect and also Ukraine can it still maybe make a difference when Germans mail in their ballots or go to the booth on Sunday the 23rd? Is foreign policy still kind of playing a role? I mean, you mentioned the former East, how voters there are more sympathetic toward Russia. And how do you think the next government, whoever's in place, will deal with it? Laura and then Melanie.
Yes, well, I would say I think Germany really is still the reluctant hegemon, I think, as The Economist coined it a while ago. And when we talk to Germans, they first of all underestimate the importance of their own country. We hear whenever we talk about climate with voters, they say that we're such a small country, we can't do much, which is so interesting, because if you talk to other European Union countries, they would not agree that Germany is a small, powerless country. And they feel that their country is on decline in terms of international power, and they actually feel pain through that. So I think there's an interesting disconnect between the challenges Germany is facing and sort of how political elites look at that and how voters and citizens look at that. So I actually think any next government will have to engage more on these issues, because especially as we see on Ukraine, and I think this mirrors a bit the conversations that we see playing out in the US, if you don't make a case that you're not doing this for another country, you're doing this for your own country, you're going to lose people's support. And I think this conversation has not happened enough in Germany, and it's not going to be an easy one, but I do think that this is something that has to not just be the backdrop, as you said it so well, Melanie, to sort of our domestic conversations, but be a little more at the center.
Melanie, what do you think? Do you think the next government, I mean, it's gonna have to. How do you think it will be able to react? Will it be able to bring citizens along because of what's happening on the continent with Ukraine, but also the new, the return of Donald Trump to the White House?
Well, I feel there is I think one of the questions labeled it as Ukraine fatigue or Ukraine war fatigue, and which is being mirrored in the descent of the BSW in the polls. I think because their main platform was peace with Russia and peace in Ukraine. And somehow they didn't seem, I mean, they did have a few other topics, but which are also addressed by other parties successfully, but they were especially credible for many people with the Ukraine peace topic. And the fact that they have declined so much, I think it's an indicator that people say, okay, there's this war going on. We had this huge number of refugees coming in, but they're here now, and we've kind of gotten used to them. And I think we realize by now that the danger of Putin invading us is not that imminent. I think so. I feel it's, and this whole the question of the funding of the military is it's just getting less important. I think people still see it as a challenge, but I don't think it's a decisive factor in this election. And it's the same with Trump. I think people are worried about him. People are scared, but do they pick their leader according to foreign policy or transatlantic issues? I'm not sure. I think the only thing that might play a role is that they will probably ask themselves which of the candidates will be best qualified to talk to Trump and make an impression on Trump. And I think that they don't, like Olaf Scholz is not looking as good as Friedrich Merz in the eyes of the public, because I mean he does have his experience as a businessman and in international huge finance company. So I think that people give him, believe that he might be better qualified to resolve conflicts with Trump. I'm not sure. I don't know what the audience thinks. I'm not sure that's right. I think maybe in the eyes of Trump, he's like a more difficult or annoying partner actually to talk to. I think with somebody like Scholz, he might use the Merkel tricks to somehow resolve or get to a compromise or get to a deal. Whereas Friedrich Merz has a very different style of negotiating, and that Trump might actually see him as more of a competition, or at least react more aggressively to the way he presents himself. So yeah, so in that way it might be a factor, but I mean, foreign policy has interestingly, never been, in my opinion, a really decisive topic in German elections. It was once with Gerhard Schröder when the Iraq War started that people were saying oh, it's good that I think it added to Schröder's second to Schröder's second
I mean,
rise in the
what was it?
vote.
The flood and keine Verhältnisse, amerikanische Verhältnisse. That's right.
Yeah.
So
but it's not in general. I don't think it's a topic Germans care that deeply about, even though we have that weight. We have that weight in Europe, and it's important that Germany grasp this role again, a leading role in Europe. But I'm afraid people don't really care about Europe. They take it for granted in many ways, like the voters. And unless a party like AfD says we're going to leave the European Union, then people are going to say, no, many people are going to say, no, thanks, we're definitely staying in the EU. Unless something radical like this is mentioned, I think most people are rather yeah, leave me alone with the EU. They're too bureaucratic anyways. So
right. No, there's definitely a sense that, Germans want less bureaucracy. And as I mentioned, I mean, a lot of the topics that you discussed, they're domestic in nature, but they have, they're tied to Germany's international positioning or positioning from the past. We're coming to a close. So I'm just going to ask you two questions that you can answer with a yes or no. I know that's never satisfactory. And there's so much more we can talk about. We'll have to do this again, but I'll ask these two questions. Will we have a new government in Germany by Easter? And will there be reform of the debt brake? Melanie, you go first.
Debt brake, yes, definitely. I mean, Merz even announced it in the duel last night. Maybe not very soon, but yes. Easter is in April, right?
I think it's like the 20th, Sunday, the 21st or something. So close to the end of April, yeah.
20th. We might, yeah. It all depends on the majorities. But I think if it's a two-party coalition, it might totally work till then.
Laura, what about you?
Debt brake, yes. And because I think this is the latest Easter I've seen in a long time, I would also say yes on Easter. We'll be close, but I think it's doable.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you both so much. It was short, but very content rich because of both of you. And thanks to all of you that tuned in. We're going to have another webinar on the 27th of February with my colleagues giving their reactions from different capitals about the result of the election. So thank you, Melanie and Laura. Have a good evening for all of you that are tuning in Europe, and for others, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great talking to you.